Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session in the course on technology and the future of medicine. Today we're honored to have David Pearce with us, talking about whether humanity's successors will be our descendants, whether they'll be related to us or not, and whether we can recalibrate the hedonic set point. So there's no more pain and discomfort in the world, only various grades of positive feeling. Okay. Trying to multitask. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to give you just a short PowerPoint intro here to this general subject. I think in previous semesters, this has been one of the most interesting teaching sessions in the course. It's really challenging to figure out where the priority for this idea might be in your own life or in, government's decisions about funding in the future. I think this can't happen if it has no priority. So one question is, will it have priority? It's very different from something we talk about every single class session, and that is the technological singularity. That is something that hasn't happened yet. We don't know a lot of the components of it. We don't know what will enable it. We don't know how it will occur. Almost certainly some of the things that will enable it do not exist yet. What David Pearce is talking about is entirely different. Everything he's talking about is sort of possible now. If we put the resources into it, if we accepted that, the ethics of messing with the genes of our progeny was acceptable to us, then we could do what he's talking about. We would know which genes to target, and we could end up in a circumstance where there is no pain, there is no discomfort. And then you immediately start to realize that you're not sure that that's entirely a good thing. Would this mean that you never feel guilt, that you never feel remorse, that you never feel anxiety if you break off a friendship with someone to whom you are close? So, but when you get right down to it, in a very simplistic level, it sounds like a good idea. And will it actually happen? Well, it could be derailed by two obvious things. One is not having priorities, not having the resources for it. So there could be economic collapse, a period of scarcity that means that resources are not going to be put into this. Or the technological singularity itself, if it actually occurs, would presumably leapfrog over this. So this would be slower. So, machines would become smarter than human beings, and on, the things we've been talking about many times. And this improvement, this biological improvement in human beings would not occur because these other things had superseded it. But if you get back to the title of this course, Technology and the Future of Medicine, this is a more medical future than the other futures that we've talked about. This couldn't happen without physicians being centrally involved, physicians buying into the idea, physicians enabling it. Whereas the other things we've been talking about don't really require physicians at all. The robots becoming smarter than human beings could occur without any medical input whatsoever, and leaving the medical establishment then scrambling to catch up. This is different. Without medicine's cooperation, it will not occur. So now I'm going to play a little bit of David Pearce's YouTube video, and then we'll talk with him. I just didn't know, even though this is fascinating, I didn't know whether every single one of you would on your own time watch the video. So I think that's the reason that we ought to do a little bit of it here. Okay, so let's try large player. Let's see here. Okay.
Hello, well yes, I am a transhumanist. Transhumanism is a very broad church, but my particular focus is on the use of biotechnology to phase out suffering, not just in humans, but ultimately throughout the living world. This can...
What?
If you were wondering if you could make it full screen, so would be one.
Yeah, okay. Let me try that. Okay. Yeah, we've been having problems with full screen, but we'll try it.
Sound extremely utopian.
Yeah, there's something about the memory requirement.
But it is...
Yeah, sorry. I know it seems like a good idea, but the computer
It's technically feasible, which isn't to say that it's actually going to happen.
No. We can do it here.
At the moment, when we have children, effectively we shake the genetic dice. It's a form of roulette. Every child is a unique genetic experiment. Some of these experiments are more happy, shall we say, than others, but any child one has today, there'll be times in that child's life where they undergo intense distress, whether physical pain or probably more commonly profound emotional distress, whether jealousy, depression, anxiety disorders. And with the genomic revolution, it is shortly going to be feasible to choose basic parameters of your child's personality and level of well-being, starting with your child's pain threshold. Though pain thresholds are modulated by a number of genes, let's just focus on one particular gene, the SCN9A gene, and this is just an example. If we were to use pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to choose relevant variants of the SCN9A gene, you could either give your child an unusually high pain threshold, a low pain threshold, or, in theory, at any rate, one could choose a nonsense mutation, in which case your child wouldn't suffer any physical pain at all. Now, for now, complete inability to feel pain would not be prudent. We need to preserve the function of nociception, but in the short term at least, choosing benign alleles that confer a very high pain threshold can actually dramatically alleviate the burden.
Okay, well anyway, let's go to him now. He seems quite eager to talk with you, so a good sign, I guess.
Hello, Kim.
Yes, hello. Good to see you.
It's good to be back.
Yeah. Well, let's just see here. Wonder if I'm recording you. Let's see, call recorder. Yes, we are. Okay, that's good. Yeah. So let's see. These students, you know, it's kind of, you know, amusing to think about. Probably a lot of people around the world speculate about your lifestyle, but what we do know is they had a party on Friday that we have extensive documentation of. And so let's see if one of them would like to come and challenge you with some questions. One or more. Come on, guys. Come on. They seem to be planning something.
Consensus. I love consensus.
Yeah, well, no. Let's see. So, tell us a little bit about the practicality of this. This idea of the 24th chromosome intrigued me because it seems to get away from a lot of the usual complications of permanently changing the genome and then doing it wrong, right? And so having your progeny forever, your children, grandchildren, everything be completely fouled up by some, erroneous decision that you made. What do you think of this idea of the 24th chromosome that would not be in the germline? Is this something that you can see as a part of the plan for the future, or does it seem ridiculous to you?
Well, it most certainly doesn't seem ridiculous. I would just, though, query the notion that sexual reproduction as it's practiced today is somehow safe, because as we know, every single child, with the exception of identical twins, is a unique genetic experiment. Unplanned. Yes, sometimes the results are relatively fortunate, but all too often they're not. So it's not a choice of safety versus risk. It's a matter of weighing risk-reward ratios. And even in the case of germline gene therapy, it's not as though it's really irrevocable, because now we have mastered the genetic code. Essentially, we'll be able to edit and re-edit at will. In a nutshell.
Yeah. So I didn't really understand if an extra chromosome is inserted and not in the germline, how do you get it into every cell? On the other hand, James Martin, I guess, is one of the wealthiest people in the UK. His opinions about things have a certain financial weight, if not scientific weight. So and this is an idea I had not heard of before. Is it practical, or is it just an old man talking nonsense?
Right now, it probably isn't feasible for humans. It will be in future. Right now, probably what we could do right now, for example, is to use pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or screening, which technically speaking isn't genetic engineering, but nonetheless one can choose one's prospective children so that they have a high hedonic set point and a very high pain threshold, i.e. they're not going to be especially sensitive to pain, and this would be feasible to do now. An extra chromosome, that's going to be probably decades away. Yes, we will be entering the era of true genetic engineering, designer zygotes, and truly radical transformations. But yes, if we're focused in what can be done now, yes, stick to pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and screening.
But isn't pre-implantation screening, it just gives us the range of offspring we have now. So some offspring have a high pain threshold, but not as high as what you're talking about. So it doesn't allow the extremes that you've actually been discussing, right?
This is true, and in the long run, I very much hope we are going to go down the route of designer zygotes. Of course, it's going to be very difficult to do well-controlled ethical experiments along these along these lines. Whereas in the case of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, one isn't actually doing genetic engineering. I mean, just to give concrete examples, catechol-methyltransferase, the COMT gene, 2 variants. One gives you effectively a high hedonic set point, other a much lower hedonic set point. Which do you choose for your future offspring? Slightly more complicated, the SCN9A gene, multiple alleles, some of which confer high pain sensitivity, others low pain sensitivity, nonsense mutations, 0 capacity to experience any form of pain. Yes, you'll essentially go for a benign variant. Now, okay, that's a very simplistic account, but this kind of choice would be feasible now. The chromosome is, probably over a couple of decades, possibly more away.
Yeah. Should I? Okay. Do you think we should reconnect with him? No. No. Okay. So we're getting a little bit of echo here, but so maybe if you turn the speaker down a little bit on your own computer, so I don't know. So the ratio of
Becky is sorting things out now. I hope this is any better.
Yeah, that is. Okay. Are there any student questions? Yay! So I thought maybe I'd completely. Yeah.
Just leave that one on. Or just set your mic on the laptop.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking about ideas, kind of, the pain threshold, all these kind of big ideas. Where do you think, what level of triviality, if you will, do you suppose these genetic mutations will be stopped at? Like hair color or eye color. I want to choose this. What level do you think they'll be done to?
Well, in principle, of course, it's going to be possible to choose all sorts of things. When one speaks of designer zygotes, genetically engineered children, people have visions of, blonde hair, blue eyes, the most kind of trivial manifestations of genetic engineering. But as I see it, there is an ethical imperative. But I said I don't see anything ethically wrong with choosing to have a child with blue eyes or particular coloured hair. It's just it's not morally urgent in the same way as making sure that your child has a high hedonic set point, so he or she is probably going to have a richer life than all too many people do now.
Do you think there will be kind of a range of what people decide to do? You'll have some people who just go with kind of the basics, the hedonic value and the pain threshold, and then some people will go and hair color, eye color, all these things. Do you think there will be a range of options of choice?
Yes, this is highly likely. Certain features, for instance, height, for instance. No one assumes is going to want to have a child with gigantism who's going to be growing to 9 feet tall. Likewise, very few people are going to want to have midgets and dwarfs, and that will flatten out. Now, if one has this notion that somehow genetically engineering height will radically improve people's lives, because as we know today, tall people have more reproductive opportunities, they're more likely to have high status jobs, etc. Well, that's not going to happen. No one will probably be significantly better off if we all normalize for height. On the other hand, something like hedonic set point, essentially everyone benefits. It's in everyone's interest to have a high hedonic set point. So whereas certain traits, like for instance intelligence or hedonic set point, I think there is going to be runaway selection, recursive self-improvement. Others like height, though in theory one can imagine scenarios where people are a 10-foot tall in future. I don't think this is very likely.
Well, thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Come on. Peter?
I have a question.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Hi there. So I'm wondering, most people, when there's like a new trend, so the new trend will be designer babies, there will be some sort of traits that are preferred that people like better than others, right? You would assume that we would all become the same almost. You mentioned that height would not be a problem in determining your class and stuff like that. Yeah, so we know that genetic diversity is quite essential for our survival. Do you think that we're pretty much climbing to our own extinction by pursuing these things?
First of all, apologies if I haven't caught your question properly because the connection was flaky. But if I've understood your question correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're worried about the possible loss of genetic diversity if prospective parents are choosing. Yes, intuitively, that's a very compelling objection, but consider this. At the moment, it's not possible for natural selection to cross so-called fitness gaps, whereas now, essentially, we're mastering the art of designing genes, and in future we'll be able to systematically manipulate and edit the genome. It will, in principle, be possible to have a far greater degree of genetic diversity. Now, in some respects, I'd argue that we don't want genetic diversity in the sense that one wants everyone to enjoy, insofar as is possible, invincible physical well-being, and I would also argue invincible psychological well-being. That in the case of invincible physical well-being, it actually enhances opportunities to have a rich and varied life. In the case of psychological well-being, it's clearly much more controversial, and what actually constitutes psychological well-being. But actually, in terms of diversity of lifestyles, other things being equal, having a high hedonic set point actually enables you to lead a richer and more diverse life. So yes, it is potentially a risk, but on balance, I think it more likely that genetic diversity will be enhanced when one can literally edit the genome. As I said, this is rather further in the future if we're talking about full-blown genetic engineering designer zygotes. Initially, we're talking about routine pre-implantation genetic screening. But are there going to be pitfalls? Yes, innumerable pitfalls. It's a matter of weighing the kind of the ethics of the genetic casino, because at the moment having a kid is frankly a genetic crapshoot, or responsible planning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi there. I was just curious about your perception. As I understand it, you believe that people should have as high a pain threshold as possible, and presumably this is designed more for a world where there is a lot less disease. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, we know today that people vary immensely in their pain thresholds, although complete congenital analgesia is certainly extremely hazardous and rare, and children born with the disorder have to have an extraordinarily cotton wool-like existence. Nonetheless, there are people who can kind of register pain okay, sort of normal nociception, and yet it isn't particularly troubling to them. It's just a signal. Basically, there is this spectrum, and though they are perhaps somewhat more prone to risky behaviour, this can be corrected for. And so, barring, what I think is in the long run this utopian-sounding goal of eliminating physical pain altogether via neuroprostheses and advanced technology like that, it just makes sense to choose benign alleles for our future offspring.
So let me get the two of you talking about heart disease. If a patient is having myocardial infarct but feels little pain, is their ultimate outcome worse?
Yes, very, very worse.
Yeah.
So what I was going to get to was suggest someone has a narrowing in their coronary artery which causes chest pain. And this narrowing starts off moderate so that they only get chest pain when they exert themselves. But if you're expressing a pain threshold as high as you suggest, then that won't occur. In fact, if I'm understanding this correctly, if the only sort of chest pain that this person will start to experience is when the blood supply is critical. And even then, they might only have like a little trickle, and until that, a little bit of pain, and until that artery is completely blocked, and the severity of the pain is enhanced. There is a whole spectrum where this patient, we're talking 6 to 12 months, where this patient could have been experiencing symptoms in which it was very treatable, and then they reach a point where the heart becomes damaged, and
good point. It would be good. I don't know if it's ever been done to do some kind of controlled longitudinal prospective study of patients or just subjects with high pain thresholds and low pain thresholds, and see if this makes a difference to their survival times. Looking slightly further into the future too, though, I assume that we're going to essentially, everyone who wants to is going to be able to have their own personal genome read, and one hopes essentially that there will be improved signalling and health measures such that one is alerted to anything like the possibility of myocardial infarction or something like that. So yes, a lot of these initiatives shouldn't be considered in isolation, but as part of a kind of comprehensive health package, or so one would hope. It's a legitimate concern you raised, which is all the more reason why these issues should be explored and discussed.
So atherosclerosis is multifactorial. So if we cannot isolate the genes that cause this, would you still do you still believe that this sort of modification of pain threshold is warranted?
As I said, if it were shown that people today who have a high pain threshold were more vulnerable than those with a low pain threshold, this would indeed involve an ethical dilemma unless one was actually taking steps to have comprehensive heart screening and the like.
Okay. Well, I mean, at the moment, heart screening only works.
I'm not a heart specialist. I must apologize for my ignorance here. It would be good to get some input from a cardiac specialist.
Well, it's just at the moment you can't screen for cardiac disease. You can only test for when it reaches a point of no return. For example. So, I mean, my concerns are only of the immediate future, I suppose, and if there's some magical course that someone can take in which heart disease is eradicated, then I'm sure this won't become an issue.
Yes, one would hope so. Once again, apologies for my lack of expertise in heart disease. But as I said, I imagine that heart disease too will have different alleles and allelic combinations that are risk factors. And one would imagine prospective parents, advised, of course, by genetic counsellors, would be making intelligent choices there too. But once again, this is supposition on my part. I don't know this. Yeah.
No problem. Thanks very much.
So the animals that are carnivores, there are a huge number of them, of course, and animals eating other animals. It's almost the largest possible problem you can think of is trying to fix all that so that no animal causes pain or any other. It could be a tremendous boon to the industry of laboratory-grown meat, right? The people making laboratory-grown meat will be all, millionaires, billionaires, right? Because it seems like that's the only solution.
Yes, so at the moment most investors have at most perhaps a 10-year investment horizon, and though one gets very encouraging and excitable articles now in the press and some of the media about in vitro meat products, and it is excellent news, my own guess is that unfortunately gourmet steaks and the like are probably more like 15 to 20 years off than 10 years off. I very much hope I'm wrong, because such is moral apathy. Moral argument can only get so far. But yes, as I said, any long-term investors in vitro meat products, I think will see fantastic returns.
Yes. So it might not take too long before you could create something in vitro that a lion or tiger might like. You might not like it, but it might be close enough to meat that they might. I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
All right, so I have a multi-part question here that you've kind of touched on already. Is there a gene that's associated with intelligence, and is it possible to make the human race more intelligent using genetic engineering? And if so, do you foresee maybe the technological singularity moving farther into the future, not because technology hasn't caught up yet, but maybe because humans are getting smarter and then, yeah.
Yes, this is of course an extremely hot button topic, intelligence, but undoubtedly there are alleles and allelic combinations associated with high scores on IQ tests. Now, the very nature of intelligence is extremely controversial. I'm one of these people who is profoundly skeptical of today's existing mind-blind IQ tests as measures of intelligence. It's, to my mind, not a coincidence that Ashkenazi Jews, for example, who are the ethnic group that record the highest IQ scores, also record the highest incidence of Asperger's. Yes, there is a real risk if one is selecting or pre-selecting alleles or allelic variations that are associated with high IQ scores, that one might end up with creating super Asperger's. I hasten to add that some of my best friends have extremely high AQ scores, and that a capacity to for this kind of autistic, hyper-systematizing intelligence can be profoundly valuable in the sciences. But I think there is a real risk if we start trying to select offspring, picking genes or allelic variations for what we currently conceive of as intelligence, as getting a very skewed result. I mean, for instance, the Chinese are very interested in this in this field at the moment, but one imagines they'll be looking, for instance, for genes predisposing to mathematical genius, not for hypersocial cognition or the Shakespearean capacity for sixth order intentionality or anything like that. So yes, a real minefield intelligence, whereas there are certainly, yes. Oh, I'll stop there. Unless, well, yes, I don't know if you've any follow-up to what I've been saying. Don't know if you agree or not.
All right, thanks.
So David Brin's latest science fiction book deals with just exactly what you're talking about. Worldwide epidemic of Asperger's, and that's part of the plot line of the book, Existence. So I guess he at least feels it's a real risk. So here's another speaker.
All right. Hello. All right. So I have a question. As we all know, designer drugs or not drugs, genes will probably be not free, right? So won't there be a case where only the rich can afford all the special genes that they'd like, and then thus provoking like a big gap between the poor and the rich, like as the rich keep getting better off and then the poor just kind of stay where they are? What do you think will really happen with that?
It's possible, but as has been well said, the cost of any information-based technology tends to zero. And yes, as we understand the basis of mood, the genetic basis of mood, intelligence, and other traits, the knowledge will and the technology will very rapidly spread. For instance, today I was talking about pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and screening earlier. Its most widespread use isn't in the rich first world, it's actually in China and India, where families are using it to avoid the misfortune of having a girl. So, yeah, I don't in any way want to make light of inequalities, but the cost is going to very rapidly fall. Moreover, simply by eliminating alleles predisposing to various nasty genetic diseases like cystic fibrosis and the like, one will be radically bringing down healthcare costs. I don't know what the current figure is, the lifetime cost of care, for instance, for someone of cystic fibrosis, but it's absolutely enormous. So there will be immense cost savings too, which are likely to eclipse any, the initial outlay of the choices involved.
All right, thanks.
So, other questions? I would point out we don't just need to deal with the details. Like if some of you think this is just wrong, you want to come up and tell us why you think it's just wrong, why that would also be okay.
Okay, you can see me. So you touched on it a bit in some previous questions and in your slides. Pain tolerance has developed over a long time for specific reasons, both physical and cultural. Physical is pretty, more easier to understand. You touch a hot stove, you take your hand away so you don't wreck your hand. But I was wondering if you could elaborate, just tell me what you think about, say you have a relationship, either, human with an object, or human with another person, or a pet. Do you think that relationship isn't quite as valuable if it's taken away, if you don't feel, pain, or if you don't feel sadness?
If it made no difference whatsoever to one's relationships, if a loved one experienced misfortune, relationships would indeed be profound, would be shallow. I would simply say that, yes, I think I'm entitled, if I experience misfortune, for instance, for this to diminish the well-being of my loved ones, friends and family. I don't think I'm entitled to want them to suffer on my account. So one can still have the functional analogues of disappointment, grief, depression, anxiety, but not the the nasty raw fields as we experience them today. In short, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So, other questions? Yes. I think ultimately you may hear from everybody in the room. We'll have to see, but it's a pretty interesting subject.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is about one article in BBC I just read a few days ago. It was about pessimistic people. They are living longer than optimistic people because they are not doing risks and all these things. So I wanted to know what's your idea about it. Well, they go into anxiety and they are worried about the things, they think more, they don't want to have risks. So don't you think if somebody is not feeling pain, they will go and do some stuff, they will risk and they will die faster?
Clearly, yes, if one has a high pain threshold, other things being equal, one is more likely to take risks. But the study reported by the BBC raised a lot of eyebrows because many other studies have shown that any predisposition to depression in depressive people have quite seriously shorter lifespans than non-depressives. This is perhaps surprising, one might think, because depressives can sometimes exhibit what's being called depressive realism. But on the whole, they don't enjoy life as much. And other things being equal, the more one enjoys life, the more motivated one is to preserve it, to look after one's health, to take exercise, to take nutritional supplements, basically to do things that maximize one's own flourishing and hopefully that of others. So once again, there are potential trade-offs here. But on the whole, being depressive, morose, anxiety-ridden is not a recipe for a long, flourishing life. To be rather grim, yes, perhaps around 1 million people each year take their own lives as a result of depression, depressive disorders. Hundreds of millions of people are clinically or subclinically depressed. And yeah, basically depressive people will tend to neglect themselves. Yes, sorry not to give a more incisive response, but yes, there are certainly risks to being too happy, but equally there are profound risks to being too depressive as well.
Okay, my second question is about animal models or animal studies. Have there been any studies that you are knock out this gene in the mice and they are not feeling any pain and they are living longer than the other mice which they have this gene to feel the pain?
I'm not aware of a specific mouse model. I know of humans who were born with a nonsense mutation of the SCN9A gene. Yes, no pain sensitivity whatsoever. Yes, I'm rather unhappy about this expression, animal models, which reduces other sentient beings to, yes, the status of mere objects we can experiment on. But yes, all kinds of studies, knockout studies are done with mice and rats, exploring the effects of removing the functionality of a particular gene or allele and seeing what effect it has.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, what about the rest of you? Stefan, any thoughts? No? Yep.
Hello again.
Hi.
So I'm curious as to how the loss of pain and the loss or the lessening of the intensity of emotions that you feel will affect our ability to learn and form memories, because everything is interrelated. And I'm sure if you decrease our ability to feel emotions and stuff, there will be some sort of a compromise that you're making in the ability to learn. What's your thought about that?
Perhaps it's worth stressing that it's going to be possible to intensify and enrich our emotions. Certainly, a number of so-called antidepressant drugs today, notably the SSRIs, can serve as so-called psychic anesthetizers and do diminish the intensity of emotions, but there's absolutely no need for this to be the case. Indeed, one hopes, as hedonic set points are progressively ratcheted upwards, that it will be safe to radically intensify emotions too. Such emotional intensification and enrichment occurs if someone takes certain designer drugs. Unfortunately, they just tend to kick into gear the negative feedback mechanisms of the brain. But I suspect our descendants, and most certainly post-humans, will regard most ordinary humans as having essentially sleepwalked through life compared to the intensity of feeling that will be possible in future. Sorry, there was a second part. Sorry, I got distracted by the first part of your question. Sorry, could you just remind me again of your other point?
It's just, how is this going to affect our learning?
Oh, sorry. It's certainly the case there is one particular genetic modification, for instance, one can make to a mouse that makes the mouse smarter on a number of indices, but it transpires that this smart mouse is also abnormally sensitive to pain, so yes, this is certainly a risk, but equally one knows that intensely pleasurable experiences can be etched firmly in one's memory too. So I don't think of itself changing pain thresholds will prevent us from learning. So no, I would say no.
Okay. And also another thing, you talk about the hedonic threshold, but isn't that a moving target? Like, if you, how much pain you feel is based on what you've experienced in the past. So these people with the high threshold, I'm not understanding, perhaps, yeah, I'm not understanding. I figured that the pain would be a moving threshold, moving target, how much pain you feel.
I'm going to restate your question just to check I've heard it. It's basically suggesting that in some way pain thresholds and pleasure, it's somehow purely or largely relative, but not an absolute. This is intuitively appealing, this idea that if one does ratchet up hedonic set points, that the dips will be equivalent to our pains and disappointments as one gets used to them. Perhaps it's unfortunate. Well, it's worth considering, though, the plight of people today who are chronically depressed or in pain. Some of their days may be worse than others, some may be not so bad, but nonetheless, in the case of severe depressives, some of them never actually reach hedonic zero. They are perpetually miserable, and one wouldn't want to claim that the days that aren't so dreadful are somehow happy days. Conversely, one knows so-called hypothymic people, unusually hypothymic people, whose essentially lives are animated entirely by gradients of well-being. They just do not fall below hedonic zero. I mean, it's counterintuitive, and so sure, some things make them even happier than others, but they haven't adapted. They enjoy chronically positive hedonic tone. and this is what I would said. The future is obviously unknown and probably unknowable, but my best guess is that whatever our future is like, it will be characterized by extraordinarily rich hedonic tone, but nonetheless there will be information-sensitive gradients of well-being, so that critical discernment, intellectual acuity, pro-social behavior isn't lost.
Okay. And why did you decide to focus on pain? Like, what was like your inspiration? Like, you know.
There are probably many people in this world for whom it is obvious that suffering, whether physical or emotional suffering, is the most important problem we face. And the whole Buddhist tradition is centered around suffering and overcoming suffering. And indeed, many people who aren't Buddhists in the West, this is obvious. But equally, there are many people today who aren't particularly prone to depression or anxiety, whose main problem in life is perhaps they sometimes get bored, and in which case they scratch their heads and will say, well, why on earth does anyone go on about suffering all the time? Isn't it rather depressing? So, yes, I mean, earlier in my life, as I said, although I've never experienced the profound suicidal depression that some people do, nonetheless, I was certainly prone to melancholia, and I've witnessed in my life a fair bit of suffering. And yes, to me it is the central, the overriding ethical problem we face. And yes, I don't see achieving a world without any involuntary suffering as the ultimate destination of sentient life in the universe. I just see it as the precondition of any civilization worthy of the name. The difference now from when Gautama Buddha was around 2,500 years ago or what have you, is that now we actually have the technology to make this happen. I know Buddhists are some Buddhists at least, are rather aghast at how some contemporary transhumanists envisage phasing out suffering, but unfortunately something like the Noble Eightfold Path is not going to recalibrate the hedonic treadmill. It's not going to phase out the horrors of the food chain. What would Gautama Buddha have thought? Well, clearly it's almost impossible to know what such a historical figure would have said if he were alive today, but all the indications are he was a supreme pragmatist. If it works, do it. I think he'd welcome the new technologies with open arms.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there again.
Hi.
You talk about how much people will benefit from people who are suffering from pathologically induced discomfort, how much they will sort of benefit from this designer gene therapy. So do you think that this might be more reserved as a treatment rather than a preventative measure, and give people a choice to utilize this? You know, some people might feel that a certain amount of pain in life is quite important to the development that we experience.
What should be our default? If one is going to bring new life into the world, is one ethically entitled to bring new suffering into the world? Shortly this is going to become optional. I think if one is going to bring new life into the world, one should at the very least make sure a minimal amount of suffering goes with it. Yes, today probably a lot of these technologies, we would probably call them enhancement technologies, but as been well said, today's enhancement is tomorrow's remediation, and I think that by the standards of our post-human successors, not merely will humans be profoundly retarded, or to use a more colloquial term, stupid, we will all seem to be in the grip of some kind of depressive psychosis, because compared to how rich life could potentially be. I mean, think of your most wonderful peak experience. Imagine if your hedonic floor were actually lower than that. Yeah, why settle for the mediocre when it's technically at least possible to have life based on gradients of sublime well-being? Not next year, probably, but certainly later this century and beyond.
Sure, but if someone's brought into this world with a guaranteed level of comfort, then surely this person has the right to make the decision for themselves. I'm not talking about bringing babies into the world with, HIV and, surely these are treatments that we should focus on, of course, but, if someone's brought into this world with a certain level of comfort, then surely they should make the decision of whether they choose to experience a certain amount of discomfort in this life or not. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I'd like to go through life feeling elated all the time. I think it's the extremes in the spectrum of emotion and physical discomfort that sort of helps form the end product.
Well, it's deeply mysterious why consciousness in any form exists in the world at all. I mean, this is the hard problem of consciousness. Why aren't we zombies? Because as far as we know, today's existing silicon, etc., robots do not experience pain, or for that matter, pleasure of any kind, and yet they seem to be in all sorts of spheres rapidly eclipsing humans in their intellectual performance. So, yes, it's problematic, extremely problematic, whether pain or pleasure of any kind is actually necessary for learning. So, yes, what can't one do with smart prostheses? I said it would be a profound discovery if it turned out that there were some problems that were computationally intractable unless one actually had the raw textures of pleasure and pain.
Sure, but how would you know you were happy if you were never sad?
This is back to the point I was trying to make earlier, that people today who are chronically depressed or in pain, even though, as I said, they in some cases cannot even imagine what it is to be happy, in severe cases don't even know what the word happiness means, their suffering is all too real and they know it. And if you speak to so-called hypothymic people today, or in a more pathological form, if you speak to someone who has a euphoric mania, yes, they certainly know they are extraordinarily happy. I hasten to add that what I'm not urging, and is certainly a risk, is that we become euphorically manic, which, as you know, mania can lead to, yes, completely out of control behavior, sexual promiscuity, impaired judgment, all sorts of problems like that. But in the case of hypothymic people, they're not manic, they simply enjoy gradients of well-being. Okay, they're not the kind of the gradients of sublime super happiness I'm talking about for our descendants, but nonetheless, if you talk to them, they're very much aware that they have rich lives. Or to quote Anders Sandberg, yes, I have a ridiculously high hedonic set point.
I agree that people who suffer from these, depressive disorders, they should seek treatment if it's available. I just don't think it should be available I don't think everyone would choose it if it was available, if you weren't experiencing any pathological suffering. But yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
So The question, I think, is how productive are happy-go-lucky people in general? I know Anders Sandberg is very productive, and he seems happy all the time, and he's jubilant and fun to be around. I had a friend earlier in my life, another physician who had been extremely lucky, I guess, in the genetic lottery. He was handsome, athletic, financially successful, lived in a mansion, married a Playboy bunny, had a big swimming pool, the whole 9 yards. He was fine, but his son just sort of looked around and realized that his life was good without accomplishing anything, and his whole life he has just been a happy-go-lucky kid that has really accomplished nothing. Would such people be more likely to occur if we get rid of pain, do you think?
Well, it seems that very crudely, motivation, drive, will, and happiness, hedonic tone are doubly dissociable, and that if, crudely speaking, one wants to amplify motivation and drive, one amplifies mesolimbic dopamine function, whereas if one wants to amplify hedonic tone, one focuses on mu opioid function in our twin hedonic hotspots. So once again, this is the kind of variable one can control. Although I've been particularly focusing on pain and mood, it will be also possible to amplify or diminish motivation, desire, drive. I think many people today, though they're not clinically depressed, would nonetheless very much like to be able to amplify their motivation as desired. But yes, other things being equal today, happier people, they tend to be more motivated. So yes, though there are certainly people who are genuinely happy-go-lucky, and there are also people who take heroin, which will tend to induce essentially a suppression of desire, of being blissed out, so to speak. Other things being equal, boosting anyone's well-being makes them, yes, engage more with the world, become more motivated. Other things being equal, that's the way we're constituted today.
Right. How is this effort of yours going? I mean, do you think more people every year are, agreeing with you, joining with you, trying to make this happen? I think the rest of transhumanism seems to be in sort of disarray. I don't get that feeling about you. You're not in an area that's in disarray. On the other hand, there are not too many other voices speaking in favor of this same idea. So how do you feel about the success of the effort that you're making?
Even within the transhumanist community, yes, it's not as though there are transhumanists advocating pain or suffering or anything like that. It's just that statistically, transhumanists tend to be optimists about the future. And if one is temperamentally an optimist, if life is good and one wants to make it better, then focus on pain and suffering and depression is not particularly exciting. So yes, I would say only a minority of people, and probably only a minority of transhumanists, would actually regard phasing out suffering as an important priority. I mean, yes, you can read it there in the Transhumanist Declaration. We're committed to the well-being of all sentients, which of course is an astonishingly radical commitment if you think about it. But I suspect many transhumanists would award it no more than a footnote. I mean, I personally, it's a very, very crude typology, but 3 currents in transhumanism one is focused on super longevity, anti-aging, Aubrey de Grey. particularly has done more than anyone else to, take radical anti-aging research out of Crank Alley and to make it a serious subject of research. But probably the dominant current in transhumanism at present is singularitarianism.
Yes.
And though if we have got post-human superintelligence, it will certainly be possible to phase out suffering and create gradients of sublime bliss, that isn't the particular focus of many singularitarians. So, yes, I said abolitionism is only one strain in transhumanism and certainly not the dominant strain. But perhaps it's worth stressing that the prospect of life based on gradients of intelligent well-being isn't an alternative to other transhumanist visions. It isn't tied to any one particular ethical theory, classical negative utilitarianism. I mean, you can be a deontologist or an ethical pluralist. I mean, this is the beauty of recalibrating the hedonic set point, that it can, at least in principle, leave your existing preference architecture and values intact, so long as one is preserving this, these kind of hedonic gradients.
Yes. So this course, is very diverse. We have a lot of people from different walks of life presenting here. And so what fascinates me every now and then are when 3 or 4 speakers all come up with the same fascinating idea. So, for instance, the idea that mitochondria are actually parasites, that they began as some sort of, infection, and that they then became a part of us. There are actually 3 people in the course who have presented us evidence. And the underappreciation of pigs, you're the 3rd person to have brought that up. Actually, I think every student in this course probably ends up with a higher, opinion of pigs at the end of the course. Yes. What happened there? Is it possible that in the future that pigs' sentience will be an important factor in the world in the way that it's not now? Or pigs just lost out big time and they were never going to make it?
Okay, we're in the realm of speculation now. But will post-human superintelligence think pigs, sheep, primitive humans worth conserving? I'm quite skeptical myself. The reason I focus on pigs is simply because, yes, I reckon that by most criteria, a pig is as sentient as a 2-year-old toddler. And as I said, as you know, we do things to pigs that if they were done to a 2-year-old toddler would get the perpetrators locked up for life. And I think our grandchildren may be absolutely incredulous that we were doing these things, and on what ground? Essentially because, we like the taste of meat. So that, I think, is the ethically significant issue. As to what forms of consciousness one will bring into the world and sustain in the next century, let alone millennia to come, as I said, I don't know. I'm merely making this generic prediction that we're going to phase out experience below hedonic zero.
Do you hold any opinions about which animals should have their intelligence upgraded when it becomes possible to enhance intelligence of animals? At what level of existing intellect should we start? Should we scale pigs, or are pigs below some sort of threshold should we only do this with whales and porpoises and, elephants? What's your own, or shouldn't we do it at all? Should we not mess with existing, intellect ranges for the other non-human species?
Well, by all means, one could, yes, if one endows a pig or an elephant with a capacity for generative syntax, their intellectual capacities on the range of cognitive skills that humans deem important will certainly be radically enhanced. One can get into rather fruitless debates with species essentialists about whether a pig with a capacity for generative syntax would truly be a pig and the like. I'm not sure this is particularly fruitful, but I wouldn't see this as having tremendous moral urgency, in that one doesn't think it truly terrible that a pre-linguistic toddler is a pre-linguistic toddler, and likewise I don't regard it as terrible that a pig or an elephant isn't capable of a rich generative syntax.
Mm-hmm. As you know, today there's a new book, the Transhumanism Reader, that's now advertised. I guess it's on Amazon as something you can pre-order, with Natasha Vita-Moore and Max Moore as the editors. What fascinates me is that the only chapter about the future of medicine is written by a non-physician. And it causes me to ask, I think your idea about the future is dependent upon the medical establishment to make it happen. So are there physicians that you know who are strong supporters of your ideas? Or is this something that is yet to happen?
First of all, it's a very long way away from mainstream consensus. You would get someone like Professor Bruce Charlton, who, and this is not true of many editors of medical journals, actually to me the honor of making his homepage on HeadWeb. You can check it out later if you're interested. But so that would distinctly be a minority. Bruce was editor of Medical Hypotheses, the Elsevier journal. Yes, perhaps noted for both some of the worst and some of the best papers that have ever been published in the history of medicine. But yes, Bruce is a maverick. But yes, though I certainly correspond with a number of physicians and academics, this is still a very long way away from the mainstream, as I'm sure you've gathered.
Yes. What I wanted to say, though, is that our lecturers by Skype vary a lot in the respect that they have for the students here and how much they enjoy talking to them. And I think you enjoy this interaction more than the other people that we've Skyped with, and that's a very favorable thing for us. So it would be nice if everybody out there were as favorably inclined toward answering the students' questions. We've had exactly the opposite. Some people have such a high, opinion of themselves that even the brightest student question is sort of below their notice. They only want to talk to peers. They don't want to talk to young people. So we're very, grateful to you for your enthusiasm.
No, well, as I said, there's some very perceptive questions. If anything, I'm worried that I haven't done, well, in fact, I haven't done justice to some of the perceptive questions I'm asked. So no worries on that score, I promise.
Yeah. Well, no, that's the same as I feel. I think that the questions from these students are as good as you could get from any group of sentient human beings anywhere. So These are good people deserving of, you know, the respect of even famous people that we interact with. So I'm glad that you share that, and I look forward to keeping on this interaction with you in future terms. And thank you very much for this period of time today. We've also worked you very hard. You know, it's an 80-minute class period, and you've almost worked for that long. So it's quite a. I don't know what you think your time per hour is worth, but we owe you big time, probably. Okay, any other questions in the last 2 minutes here? Any parting shots? Okay, well...
Yeah, anyone who is shy and doesn't feel like standing in front of a camera, by all means, drop me an email and I'll do my best to answer any questions or points. So, yes, if you're not one of these people who likes a camera, I'll quite understand.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that. And so I think we'll let you go after another very successful Skype session, and we'll look forward to next term and the term after that. So anyway, thank you very, very much, David.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you everyone else. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye now.